everybody. I'm Kim Heil. I'm the artistic producer and head of casting for the Old Globe. This is the Insights Seminar with the director of Murder on the Orient Express, Peter Amster. I'd like to just take a moment and acknowledge our friends Vicki and Carl Zeiger, who sponsor the Insights Seminar series. And I don't think they're here, but let's give them a round of applause anyway. We really do appreciate their support. So, as you all know, this is an opportunity for us to get to know our visiting artists. And, you know, some people ask me, gosh, you know, you just feel like, it just feels like you have so much fun up there. And I do, because I, like you, am just as curious as all of you about these wonderful artists who come to the Old Globe and share their artistry with us. And Peter is someone who I have been like waiting for this, because you are chock full of just experience and insight into this theatrical process. So they get to enjoy the fruits of my curiosity about you, Peter. So Peter has actually come to us from Florida, where he directed this production twice before. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, certainly. Hi, everybody, by the way. I'm Peter. Yeah, it started in 2019, just before COVID hit, and Ken Ludwig was the first person that the Agatha Christie estate gave the rights to make a stage version of Murder on the Orient Express. It was only in the movies or on TV. I'm sure some of you have seen either the 1972 version or the more recent one with Kenneth Branagh, or the David Suchet version on BBC anyway, but it had never been on stage before. And it seemed to me, when I was told about it, that it was a very unlikely marriage. Because you've seen Ken Ludwig's works. He is America's premier farceur. I mean, his stuff is pretty hilarious. And Murder on the Orient Express is about, number one, murder. Number two, about the death of a child. There are some serious themes in there, and it seemed to me that that might be a very strange mashup. Well, the fact is, as I read it when I was offered it, I said, my God, this thing works. That he has been able to integrate humor with very serious topics here, and of course allowing humor to feed into what we call the police procedural, which Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle invented, and created a script that really kind of spoke to me in very, very many ways. And we decided to do it at the Oslo Theater in Sarasota, Florida, and assembled a team of designers. Have any of you seen it yet in the previews? You got a treat, because I mean, I'm very proud of my own work, but what I'm most proud about is the way that all of the designers came together and created something that is larger than the sum of its parts. It's really gorgeous. It moves like lightning. You get a very visceral sense of being on a train. That part, I think, is going to be a fun ride for everybody. Well, that was part of the original production, and it was very successful. It pretty much sold out at the Oslo, and so, you know, other producers from around the country, such as Barry and such as Andrew Cato at the Maltz Jupiter Theater, came sniffing about. And they said, well, could we move that wonderful production to our theaters? And of course I said yes, being no dummy. And every place it's gone has been selling out, mostly having to do with the name Agatha Christie. I mean, we know that. But I think that probably what's going to happen as people see this production, it's pretty thrilling that they're going to come and beg for tickets. And I hope there's some left.
I'm going to assume, actually, Peter, that part of the reason why perhaps it had not been adapted for the stage is really just the prospect of having to adapt the events on a train onto a stage, right? And you think about a train, long, narrow, maybe even a little claustrophobic, but you all have figured out a way to address that?
Well, it was Paul Tate Depew III, the scenic designer, who kind of came up with the brilliant idea. As you can imagine, a train, even if you're just in one car, a sleeper car or the dining car, it's a very long, narrow thing. It takes letterbox to new dimensions. However, in this production, we also hired a projection artist who's also a video artist. And so there's all this stuff above the train itself that uses video, uses projections as a way of reinforcing what's happening in the train below. So it expands the visual element of in the show in a way that's extremely satisfying. Particularly, I mean, you will see, I don't think I'm giving anything away, that in the last scene when Hercule Poirot says, "Do you remember when?" and we have the actors speaking the same lines that they did in the first scene, that the image of them appears as a memory up there, blown up larger than life. And so, unless you're in the first row doing this, if you're in the second row, you're good. There's a way in which what's happening in the video above, not only the train hurtling through a snowstorm or being stuck, the imagery that's being used, but that what's happening up there is integrated to what's happening with the live actors in the train itself. And that the way that the scenery moves, there's just not enough wing space in any theater on God's green earth to have an entire train all the way. So they figured out a way of doing it. It's not a turntable, but it's kind of like a metal octopus that brings the trains around in a kind of circle that's extremely clever. And allows you to watch people go, as the scenery is moving this way, people are moving that way down the corridor. So there's almost a kind of cinematic feeling about the way the show works.
You mentioned Ken Ludwig, who we have produced here before several times, and you've collaborated with him several times as well.
I've done 5 of Ken's shows. And I've done Lend Me a Tenor, both playing the tenor and directing it. I've done The Games Afoot. I've done Baskerville. I'm trying to remember what the 5th one. I can't remember. Anyway, and with Ken, he is a funny man, and he understands the mechanics of comedy like probably no other living playwright that there is. Sometimes what happens is that actors, and even myself, kind of fall in love with the comic aspects of his thing, and it can skew towards the shticky. I excuse the expression, but we call these people laugh whores. we want to go there far and put quotation marks around anything and mug and all that. And so my job as director, and what I've learned by doing a number of Ken's shows, is how to balance the shtick and the stakes. What's important? Where is the story going? Let's keep that alive. Sometimes the shtick will take care of itself, or throw it away, or I use what I call a mug and run. Just mug and run. But mostly keep what's important about the play alive and moving forward. And nothing. This show is a perfect example of it, because it really is about. I don't know if you know Murder on the Orient Express, but it was informed not only by Agatha Christie's actually taking the Orient Express shortly after her divorce, and then finding out, like a few weeks later, that the train got stuck in the mountains in a snowstorm for 7 days. So she filed that away. That was in 1928. And then in 1932 was the Lindbergh kidnapping, when Lucky Lindy, not so lucky at that point, his young son was kidnapped, and even though he paid the $200,000 ransom, the child was found murdered in the woods. And of course, we're dealing with that still now. And so the issues of how do we deal with, what can we do? Dealing with the death of a child. What should we do? What do we have to do? So these are the questions that I think the play brings up, and they're important and heartbreaking questions, but it's balanced with a kind of hilarity and sense of humor, I think, that integrates pretty successfully.
I would agree with that. And in fact, I don't want to give anything away, but I do think that one of the choices you made that was not in the script really elevates the storytelling.
I don't think I'm giving anything away to say that when Ken originally wrote it, it was made for 12 actors. I talked to Ken and I said, do you mind if we get a 13th actor there? I want little Daisy to appear. I want for us to remember and to remind us what everybody is grieving about. I mean, for those of us who have been through loss, whether it's of a child or a spouse or anything like that, the presence of that absence is palpable. And I wanted to make sure that was part of what was going on stage.
Yeah, it's just one of the more powerful elements, I think, in the story. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of spectacle, because we talked, about the set and the fact that there's this train on stage, and it's quite a sight to behold. Your experience as a director also has very much been in the world of spectacle through opera, and yet you obviously straddle both worlds. You do traditional theater and you do opera. What is it about that sense of scale in opera that appeals to you that I think is also present in this show here?
Oh, opera. Big voices, big passions, love, murder, death, betrayal, all that fun stuff. Requires a large arena. There are very, yes, there are chamber operas, and yes, they can work in small rooms, but I personally find it, grand opera with, grand costumes and grand staging. There's nothing that can beat it. It's more fun than I can, anyway. And since I started as a singer and a dancer, for me, being in the presence of those voices is an extraordinary experience, and it invites, through the imagination of scenic and costume designers and lighting designers, a kind of epic scale that I just find thrilling. I mean, I love everything from storefront theater. I mean, I spent 48 years in Chicago, where storefront theater was exactly what we did most of the time. But there's something about doing a large production, and particularly in the present climate where there's not an awful lot of money going around, and particularly since the pandemic. One of the things I adore about this theater is that they have the wherewithal, not just the funds, but the administration, the size to be able to accompany and to give a production exactly what it needs. It's getting rarer and rarer. I used to work at a lot of other Shakespeare theaters, and they're all hurting. And what's amazing about this place, because of your support of it, is that it seems to have weathered the storm very nicely, and gives those of us who like to have our work writ large a chance to be able to do that.
And so, I mean, now that you are here with a show that does actually require a larger cast, just relatively speaking, in the world of the theater, anything over 4 can be considered a large cast, sadly. Because I kind of scolded him earlier, because when I was trying to do research on him, I was trying to find the sort of definitive CV with the list of productions that he's directed, and I couldn't find it. And instead, all I found were he's directed at all of these different places, from Utah Shakespeare Festival, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Court Theater, Goodman Theater, but no shows. And so, it was difficult for me to sort of trace, okay, but where, I want to know, have you done a Camelot? I'm thinking of large scale musicals that have an operatic flair to them. Have you done Rodgers and Hammerstein, et cetera?
Yeah, I have. I've done pretty much all of the Rodgers and Hammerstein catalog. I didn't do Me and Juliet. That's the only one I think that has escaped me. Of the Lerner and Loewe, I have not done Camelot, but I've done 3 My Fair Ladies. I did a stage reading of Paint Your Wagon, and that was enough. I've done, I've probably, I've been directing for over 50 years. She said she was looking for a CV with all my stuff. It doesn't exist. I stopped keeping count a long time ago. As I was telling her, it was about 15 years ago that I decided I've got to start to remember this stuff. And so I went down to the basement and drew a timeline to figure out where all the various shows I did. And then we sold the house, and I forgot to take pictures of it. I have no idea. All I can say is I've probably directed around 200 plays over the last 52 years or so. I mean, plays, musicals, operas, etc. For 10 years, I was the head of the opera program at Chicago Performing Arts College in Chicago. And, so directed probably about 15 operas there, and Chicago Opera Theater, and the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and a bunch of smaller ones as well.
So what would you say is your favorite kind of theater to direct?
The next one. Here I am, going to be 75 any minute now. And during the pandemic, of course, all the theaters shut down, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I was kind of like I had defined myself as a theater director, now what? So I started making very good sourdough bread and challah, and things like that, and got into gardening. And as much as I enjoyed that, I felt like part of me was gone. And so what miraculously happened, I mean, thanks to Kim and Barry here and some of the other theaters that I've worked at, I'm having like a second career. And luckily, I somehow still have the energy for it, and I'm having a ball. But yeah, I can't remember everything I've done. But usually people said, "Well, do you know this play?" I said, "Yeah, I've done it twice." A lot of Noel Coward. I'm often known as somebody who does high style, particularly British comedy, high period American comedies. I've done a couple of You Can't Take It With Yous and stuff like that. Noel Coward, Oscar Wilde, lots of Jane Austen. I love jumping into those stories and telling them. I'd like to think of myself as an honorary feminist. And so exploring, the sensibilities, so to speak, of Elizabeth Bennet or oh God, no, I can't think of her name. Begins with an E. Eleanor. That's something else. There's a musical about the Brownings called Robert and Elizabeth, which I loved doing. Elizabeth Bennet and Dashiell. Thank you. From Sense and Sensibility. That was one of the last shows I did. So, yeah. Can I say what my favorite is? No,
Yes.
I can't.
No.
I can't. I wish I could. It's the next. Like I said, it's the next one. There's always something that's a new adventure because otherwise, I can't do yesterday's show. I can only do tomorrow's. And I find even with remounts and like this, I always, or shows that I did 20 years ago, or shows that are being revived for the first time in so many years, I have to treat it as if it were a new play, or a new opera, or something brand new. I have to be curious about it.
What was it in your childhood or maybe in your young adulthood that led you to this art form?
I have no idea. I guess I was a very kinetic child. My mother, because of certain circumstances, was on a lot of pain drugs just before I was born, and I came out like shot out of a cannon. So I was very hyperactive, and the first thing I did was become a dancer. I mean, starting at age like 13, I started ballet with New York City Ballet, and was pretty much considered a dancer until I injured my leg on stage, and that was the end of that. But so I became a choreographer, and then from there it was easy to move into directing. But I think probably I moved into directing, I backed into directing that way. I started with movement. And yeah.
You went to Northwestern,
Yeah.
yes?
I went to Northwestern. By some fluke of nature, I got an 800 on my math SATs.
What?
It had to have been a mistake. And so they let me in. There was at the time, this is back in 1967, there was a time when they had a 6-year medical program where you took 2 years of undergraduate and went right into medical school. Well, I lasted for about a year, getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning, winter quarter, on the Chicago shoreline, going to biochemistry classes, and said, this is not for me. And also, by that time, I was directing and performing for the Northwestern University Gilbert and Sullivan Guild. The first thing I ever directed was The Mikado, back in 1970. And also working with the opera company, et cetera. So I was doing that on the side. And then I came to New York, saw some stupid show. I'm not even going to tell you what it was, and said, you know something, I'm on the wrong track here. And I was also at that time wanting to be a choral conductor because I had, I had done that in high school. And my mom, who always gave great advice to just about everybody else, gave me the only bad advice she ever gave anybody in her life. She said, darling, you're never going to make any money in music. Better you should go into theater. So I went into theater.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was your first gig as a director?
Well, The Mikado
That's right.
was, while I was still a graduate student at Northwestern University, and then I was an actor for a while. So probably, oh God, my first directing. Interesting. I co-directed and choreographed a number of shows before that, but the first thing I think I remember doing that was all mine was a Theater for Young Audiences production of Tales from the Arabian Night at Indiana Repertory Theater. And from there, I moved from the little theater upstairs to the big house right downstairs. And from there to various theaters and back in Chicago, where they only knew me as a dancer and a choreographer, and so they had no idea that I was interested in directing. And I had to go to Indiana and then to Oregon Shakespeare Festival and to a number of other theaters before Chicago said, oh, you actually do that? Anyway.
One of the things that I've enjoyed in our time together, Peter, is sometimes you name drop.
Oh.
because you've worked with a lot of amazing people.
I have.
And I feel like, you are one of the warmest, most down-to-earth theater people that I've met. And I think that maybe that comes from working with just a variety of, a range of personalities. And because I can't help but think that everyone who works with you falls in love with you in some way. And so I'm curious, like when you think about the different artists that you've had an opportunity to work with, what have you learned from working with, some pretty incredible people?
Yeah, I'm not going to name drop there, but what I am going to say is I was very fortunate to have as my partner a really great director. His name was Frank Galati. He won 2 Tonys for The Grapes of Wrath on Broadway. He was the first director for Ragtime on Broadway. He was, just before he passed, he was inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame. He got an Oscar for writing the screenplay of Accidental Tourist. Anyway, but more important, he was a great educator. And one of the things I learned about him, because I did take classes from him and watched his work, and we worked together a lot, I choreographed shows for him, is that he would validate everyone, students, actors, whatever, as artists, right from the beginning. The way that he talked with you was a way of saying, we are working together on the same level here. And that, I think, and I learned from that. And that, I think, it flattered those people who were, much more experienced and well-known than I was, but also let those people who had less experience kind of like, it lifted them up, just by having the confidence of knowing that they were appreciated for all the gifts that they were giving at that moment, at that time. That, to me, was an important strategy in the way that I've worked.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to people who are venturing into this world of the theater, where we have really just we've got some difficult folks out there, but you seem to have a way of really just bringing people together?
Well, there are difficult folks out there. I just don't hire them.
Good point.
No, it's true. When you're sitting behind a table, especially with the wonderful Kim here, and somebody comes into the room, you can almost immediately tell if they're going to be team players or not. And usually it has to do with it's not whether you're interested in them, it's whether they're interested in you. And they bring into the room enthusiasm, they're prepared, and they're curious. that to me, they're asking questions. They're, you know, I try to engage them in a little bit of a conversation at the beginning of each audition to see what, you know, to test the waters. And those people who are simply bringing their wares in to be seen, those aren't always the people who are the most engaging in a kind of two-way conversation that art needs to be. So I think in some ways it's a self-filtering thing for me, and I get to work with the best people, and particularly if I don't know them, I've got people here who do. Yeah, one of the things that, particularly for hiring this extraordinary cast, is that Kim and the casting director, who was wonderful, Claire Burke, they've been around. They've seen everybody. I mean, casting in New York as well as locally here. And so I rely on their advice in terms of, okay, between these two actors, what do you think? And usually they'll come up with, this one will be the more enjoyable person to work with. And that, to me, is a tipping point. It's very important. You know, I mean, I'm being compensated very well. However, you know, if you're dealing with pills, sometimes it feels like it's not worth it.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's that way in every business.
I do think, though, that, you know, we found a common language when we started seeing people, and we did see a lot of great people, but I could tell, you know, because I think we were together, what, 4 days, 5 days? It was a long process. And I think by like day 2 or 3, I started to link to your way of seeing people, which is something I actively try to do, because I believe, you know, you're the artist. This is your vision. I want to help you make your vision come true, not sort of impose whatever I think is right. And so, you know, over the course of those few days, I started to hear how you spoke to them, how you know, complimented them when they left the room, and I did start to see how you saw actors, and that was a really wonderful insight into how you know, evaluated them, because that is what we're doing.
Well, the thing is, I was an actor once upon a time, so I know how fragile we can be.
Yes.
But I think what's important is that I learn from actors. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times where, you know, I have an idea for a scene in my head, and I direct it, I put it onto the stage and all that, and then I go away, and they do it, and I say, wait a minute, something's wrong here, and they'll say, now, if I just did this and this, what would you think? And I go back, oh, that's what this scene is about. I learn what a play is by listening to and watching actors. They're, you know, I think it was Peter Brook who said, you know, when you give directions, you don't take anybody there. You try to tell them how to get there, and they have to get there on their own. And meanwhile, they're getting there. And if you just watch them trying to get there, you're going to learn so much. They're, you know, that's another way of validating them as artists, because they're the ones doing it.
Yeah. And I think also because Murder on the Orient Express was such a big cast, we had to create, not just, you know, obviously find people to bring these characters to life, but we had to create a collective of interesting people that sort of complemented each other. And I feel like we did a really good job doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, when you'll see it, you'll notice that so many of these actors are making interesting, surprising choices. I mean, I think Ken and the novel kind of writes these characters not as caricatures, but as symbols of something. And it takes those actors and our work together in order to create them into real living human beings. And they're, you know, and from all 3 casts that I've been working with, some of these actors are so different from each other. The performances they're giving in the same role, saying the same words, doing most of the same blocking, are so completely different, bringing different vitality, different energy, different colors to it. I mean, when you see Melinda Hull as Helen Hubbard in this, totally different than the last 2 times we did it, and bringing a kind of fabulous strangeness and humor into into that character that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah. And really, truly, this cast, their chemistry just works so well on stage. And I was, you know, just very proud to have had a part in that with you.
Well, I couldn't have done it without you, babe.
Wow. Well, I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment, but I want to know what's next for you, Peter.
Oh, what's next? Oh, 2.5 months of rest. No, not quite rest. I've got a lot of preparation to do. I've got nothing until January, but then I've got 2 shows back to back. I'm doing, there's a theater in Southern Florida in Naples called the Gulf Shore Playhouse that just moved, in the process of moving, from a community center space with folding chairs and like a platform into a $80 million new theater, and they asked me to direct for the inaugural season, so which I was thrilled to do, and they asked me to direct Noises Off. With some of, I'm sure many of you know what that is, which is, it's like it's the end of where farce can go.
Sardines?
Sardines. Now you leave the sardines and you take the newspaper. No, it's and preparing for it is like trying to play 3-dimensional chess. It's hard. But right after that, there was a recent show on Broadway. I'll be directing back at the Oslo. I live in Sarasota. Called a show that I'm directing called Good Night, Oscar. I don't know if any of you heard of it. It came and went on Broadway, but it's about the night that Oscar Levant appeared on The Tonight Show, Jack Parr's Tonight Show in Burbank, California in 1958. And I don't know if any of you know who Oscar Levant is, or if you've seen him in a number of different movies, including American in Paris, and also in the talk shows. He was one of the funniest men alive, and he was probably the most certifiably insane. In fact, he was literally let out of a mental institution in order to appear on the show, which the producers didn't know at the time. So that's the setup. And of course, Jack Parr asks him, and he was also a piano prodigy, and wrote his own pieces as well, and was a very good friend of George Gershwin's. So, what this play is about is whether Oscar Levant will or will not play Rhapsody in Blue. And he doesn't want to in the worst way, because Gershwin, who appears, even though he's dead, appears in the play. He brings him back in order to haunt himself. He's scared to do it, and somehow at the end he does. And so finding an actor who can impersonate Oscar Levant and play all of Rhapsody in Blue live on stage, there's not that many actors in America that can do that. But
Who'd you get?
I got the understudy from the Broadway production, who really was looking forward to working with me as I was with him. And he's completely, unlike Oscar Levant, I mean, he's younger, he's a thin, good-looking guy, but he plays like a dream, and he's a good impersonator. So, I mean, okay. And, when I went asking about it, the playwright told me, if you don't hire him, you're an idiot. And I know that the guy who got the Tony Award for playing the role on Broadway, Sean Hayes, I have a story about Sean Hayes.
See? Name dropping.
Back in 1987, I was directing a production of Tosca at a little opera company out in the western suburbs of Chicago called the DuPage Opera Theater. And there was a kid at the piano, chewing gum and reading a magazine. And when it was time for him to play, he would put the magazine, swivel to the piano, and open the score to a full orchestral score and play the piano as if he were a Puccini orchestra. And this was this kid. And I thought, wow, that's something. And then as soon as it was finished, he'd close it, pick up his magazine, and start chewing gum again. Well, anyway, he didn't have a ride home, so I told him I would drive him home. And I got into the car, and he got into the car, and he burst into tears. And I said, Sean, what's the matter? And he said, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. I don't like accompanying. I don't even like playing piano. I said, Sean, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be a star. He actually did. I said, well, wipe your eyes, honey. If you're as good a pianist and a genius at that as an actor and a comedian as you are at that, you will have no trouble. And so for the next 6 or 7 years, he would send me his demo tapes of him selling merchandise and having walk-on roles and sitcoms and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'd like to say I'm responsible for his career.
That's right.
But I'm not. He is.
All right. Well, we're going to actually open it up. We have a few more minutes. So if you have a question for Peter, please do raise your hand. There's someone here, and there's someone here, and someone in the back. All right.
Good evening, Peter. Welcome to San Diego, and thank you for bringing your gifts to us. We lost a day ago an icon in theater in James Earl Jones, and I'm curious if you have a J.E.J. story.
Oh, I wish I did. I wish I did, except for the fact that I saw him on Broadway in Great White Hope. I was a senior, and it was such a volcanic, even though there had been buzz already about it, such a volcanic performance and experience. It was probably the first show in my young life, I think I was 17, where I couldn't move afterwards. I had to just sit there and regather myself because of what, not only the story that he and Jane, who was with, Jane Alexander, thank you very much, were telling. And the fact that it was operatic in scale and all that, but he was bigger than life. And I remember that, everybody at the very end came out and did their little bow. He came out with a towel around his neck and threw it down, and then left the stage. And it was it was something. That's all I know about James Earl Jones, except for the voice of Darth Vader.
We have a question. I'll just repeat it. Oh, wait, we have a mic coming to you right here.
I'm just curious about the train. Is this setup very similar to the ones that you had in Florida?
Yes, it's pretty much it is the same set that has moved from the Oslo Theater to here. We have some brilliant artisans and artists, however, in the shops here that is making it look brand spanking new. As far as all the finishes, all the marquetry, all the tablecloths and everything like that. So in some ways, it looks better now than it did in the original production, thanks to the scenic department and the props department here at the Old Globe.
It looks like it was built for us, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question in the back.
Hi, thank you for your time tonight. I'm just curious about your creative process. How would you describe it, especially if you find yourself stuck in a rut ever creatively? What gets you moving forward?
Wow. What gets me moving? Well, first of all, it starts with curiosity. It has to, in terms of reading a script. And all good reading is rereading, whether it's a novel, a script, a poem, whatever. You have to know where it's heading before you could go back and really understand what its arc and architecture is. And for me, when the second or third reading is when I start to engage my imagination and see how can this take purchase on the stage. So there's that. But when I get stuck, I find the best thing to do is close the book, go out, take a walk, breathe some fresh air, come back and look at it again through new eyes. And very often that's all I need for to say, okay, just to free up the playfulness, because the playfulness, I mean, they're called plays for a reason. The playfulness that's needed to be able to imagine what a production would be like. Sometimes requires just getting away from the book, getting out of the reality. Sartre has this wonderful book called The Psychology of the Imagination, in which he explains that in order to have an image to imagine, you have to make the absent present and the present absent. In other words, you can't imagine an elephant until I see the sea of people disappear. And so when you're reading a book and reading a play or something, if you're stuck looking at these words, you're not going to be able to engage your imagination. So part of it has to do with the fact of just, erasing and then coming back.
Yeah. Yes, we have a question right here.
Oh, thank you. I just wondered what's some advice you would give to an aspiring director. Aspiring director.
Hopefully they can be inspiring as well. I think that's probably one of the first things they need to do is, first of all, to trust their imaginations, trust their visions, listen to their elders, We've learned a few tricks, some of us old ones. And for me, I try never to do a production without having a young assistant director at my side, because I used to teach for a long time and I miss it, and so I like having that pedagogical aspect of it. Not that I'm handing them anything, but allowing them to view a process that has been well worn by time. So I'd say become an assistant director. That's the most important thing. Listen and watch what directors do. Find out if what they do inspire you. And there are a lot of directors out there that will not inspire you, that have other ways of going about it, which really have an awful lot to do with ego. So it seems to me that following their dream, by starting inside the process that way might be the best way of doing it. And finding small theaters where, okay, you have 4 crayons to play with, that's your set, go. Taking those challenges in those smaller places and creating something beautiful with them.
Thank you.
We have time for maybe one more question. We have someone up here. She's going to come up here with a microphone.
I go to a lot of plays. I'd go every night if I could. And people say to me, how can you watch the same play again? And I say, it seems to me that a director always adds a little bit of their own, even in the most famous plays that we know. Do you go into a play kind of thinking, like in My Fair Lady, I'm going to twist this a little bit? Do you do that? Because I seem like there is always a little bit, if you've seen the play before, there's something different.
Well, every director is going to approach a script or a musical or whatever with who they are, and bring their own stamp to it. I try not to do that. I try to get out of the way of plays as much as possible. But every once in a while in the rehearsal room, and it usually happens as a spark between me and the actors, where we discover something that is just, it's absolutely true to the play, but it's different than the way it was ever done before. In My Fair Lady, for example, the second time that I directed, we discovered that at the very end of the play, when I don't know, most of you have seen My Fair Lady. At the very end, when Henry Higgins, when she comes back to him, which always seemed kind of, I don't know, that seemed to be the wrong ending for a feminist interpretation of My Fair Lady. So, in the end of the first act, she shies the slippers at him. There you are with this, and there you are. And the first one hits him in the face, and the second one he ducks in the end of the first act. In this end of the second act, he says, Eliza, where the devil are my slippers? She picks up those damn slippers again and does the same thing. The first time she hits him once again in the head. The second time he catches it. And it's like, you ready to play this game? And she says, you betcha, but on a level playing field. So whether Shaw or Lerner and Lowe would approve of that, I don't know. But it seemed to me, in terms of the story I wanted to tell with My Fair Lady, that was a choice that made a lot of sense.
And I would say what you've done with Murder, Ken Ludwig has given it his A+ approval.
Yeah. No, he's complimented me, but Ken started out as a lawyer, so he's probably complimenting everybody.
Well, Peter, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today, so thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you see the show tonight, enjoy the show.